The little girl tugged desperately at the wealthy stranger's sleeve, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. "Please help! They're taking everything from my mom!" she sobbed, pointing toward the diner where shouting echoed through the small town's empty street. But neither of them could have possibly foreseen how a simple necklace would change everything forever. Before we continue this incredible true story, tell us where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe for more heartwarming stories that will restore your faith in humanity. For God's sake, I'm begging you, Frank. Just one more week. Sarah Miller clutched the counter of Miller's Diner, the place that had carried her family name for 3 generations, now about to slip through her fingers like morning coffee through a paper strainer. Frank Dawson, the bank manager with a receding hairline and expanding waistline, shuffled the foreclosure papers with practiced indifference. "Sarah, you're 6 months behind. I've given you every extension possible. The bank wants its property, and that's final." The diner, empty except for Lily, Sarah's 8-year-old daughter coloring quietly in the corner booth, had never felt so hollow. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the 1950s-style red vinyl booths where countless truckers, families and local characters had enjoyed Sarah's grandmother's famous apple pie recipe for decades. "My daughter and I live upstairs. Where are we supposed to go tonight?" Sarah's voice cracked, the weight of single motherhood crushing down harder than ever before. "That's not the bank's concern," Frank replied, not quite meeting her eyes. "Business is business." A mirthless laugh escaped Sarah's lips. "Remember when your wife was pregnant with twins and on bed rest? Who brought meals to your house every night for 3 months? Business is business, sure, Frank." Frank had the decency to flush red but remained unmoved. "You have until closing time to clear out your personal belongings. I'm sorry." When he left, Sarah collapsed onto a stool, the weight of her world crashing down. How had it come to this? After her husband Tom's death 2 years ago, she'd fought to keep the diner afloat while raising Lily alone. The medical bills from Tom's prolonged illness had been the first domino to fall, followed by the new highway diverting traffic away from their exit, and finally the pandemic that had crushed so many small businesses. Sarah touched the silver locket around her neck, Tom's last gift before cancer stole him away. Inside was a faded photo of them on their wedding day, young and blindly optimistic about the future. "Mommy?" Lily's small voice interrupted her thoughts. "Are we going to be okay?" Sarah wiped her tears quickly. "Of course, honey. We always land on our feet, don't we?" But as Lily returned to her coloring, Sarah had no idea how she would make good on that promise. The diner wasn't just their livelihood, it was their home. With only 237s in her bank account and a maxed-out credit card, their options were non-existent. The bell above the door jingled, startling Sarah from her spiral of despair. "Sorry, we're closed," she called automatically, before looking up to see a striking man in an impeccably tailored suit, completely out of place in their small town of Millfield, Connecticut. "Actually, I was hoping for a cup of coffee," he said with a smile that suggested he was accustomed to getting what he wanted. Something in his voice, a faint accent she couldn't place, made Sarah stand straighter. "I can manage that," she said, reaching for the coffee pot, grateful for even this small transaction. As she poured, she noticed him studying her intently. Under different circumstances, she might have been flattered by the attention from such a handsome stranger, but today she just felt exposed, as if he could see every worry line, every sleepless night etched on her face. "Rough day?" he asked, accepting the steaming mug. Sarah offered a brittle smile. "You could say that." The stranger opened his mouth to respond when the back door burst open and Frank returned with a sheriff's deputy. "Sarah, I'm sorry, but we need to start the inventory process now," Frank said, his eyes darting nervously to the well-dressed customer. The stranger raised an eyebrow, sipping his coffee with newfound interest in the unfolding drama. "I thought I had until closing time," Sarah protested, her voice rising despite her best efforts to remain calm in front of Lily. "Plans changed," Frank muttered. "The bank president wants this wrapped up today." Sarah felt her world tilting sideways as the reality hit her. In mere hours, she and Lily would be homeless. What happened next would change everything. James Carson had not planned to stop in Millfield. With a net worth that would make most people's eyes water, the tech mogul turned venture capitalist was simply taking the scenic route back to New York after a disappointing meeting in Boston. His driver had taken ill suddenly, forcing James to take the wheel himself, something he hadn't done in years. The need for caffeine had led him to the quaint diner with the flickering Miller's sign. He certainly hadn't expected to walk into what appeared to be a woman's life imploding in real time. As the bank manager and deputy began taking inventory, James watched the diner owner's face. Despite her obvious distress, she maintained a dignity that impressed him. Her daughter, a small blonde child with eyes too serious for her age, clutched a worn teddy bear while watching the adults with visible anxiety. "Mommy, are they taking Mr. Pickles too?" the little girl asked, her voice trembling. The woman, Sarah, he'd gathered, knelt beside her daughter. "No, honey, Mr. Pickles is yours. They're just counting the diner's things." James sipped his coffee, which was surprisingly excellent. As a man who dined in the finest restaurants globally, he recognized quality when he tasted it. The bank manager's voice grated on his nerves as the man catalogued items with obvious relish. "The espresso machine will fetch a good price," the bank manager noted. "That was my father's," Sarah said quietly. "I bought that with my own savings before any of this." "It's a fixture of the business," the bank manager replied dismissively. James cleared his throat. "Excuse me." 3 heads swiveled toward him. "Would someone mind explaining what's happening here?" he asked, though he'd pieced most of it together. The bank manager straightened his tie. "Sir, this is a private matter between the bank and the property owner." "A former property owner," the deputy corrected with unnecessary precision. James saw Sarah flinch at the words. "I see," James said, reaching for his wallet. "And what's the outstanding amount?" The bank manager blinked rapidly. "I'm afraid that's confidential information. It's 147,832.46, Sarah said flatly. "Plus another $23,000 for the mortgage on the apartment upstairs." James nodded thoughtfully. The amount was pocket change to him, literally less than he'd spent on his last watch. "Would the bank consider the debt settled if that amount were paid in full today?" he asked. The silence that followed was deafening. The bank manager recovered first. "Theoretically, yes, but no," Sarah interrupted firmly. "Absolutely not." Now it was James's turn to be surprised. Women in his experience rarely turned down his money. "I don't know who you are or why you'd offer that," Sarah continued, color rising in her cheeks, "but I don't take handouts from strangers." James felt a smile tugging at his lips. He'd built his fortune identifying promising investments others overlooked. Something about Sarah's fierce independence intrigued him. As she turned away, the silver locket around her neck caught the light. James froze, his coffee mug suspended halfway to his lips. That locket. He'd seen one exactly like it before. The intricate silver filigree pattern wasn't something mass-produced. It was distinctive, handcrafted. "That necklace," he said, his voice oddly strained. "May I ask where you got it?" Sarah's hand flew protectively to the locket. "It was a gift from my late husband. Why?" Before James could respond, the little girl approached him, studying his face with uncanny intensity. "Are you a prince?" she asked suddenly. "In my books, princes always save people." Sarah looked mortified. "Lily, honey, that's not appropriate." James knelt to the child's level. No, not a prince, just someone who might be able to help. He glanced up at Sarah. If your mother will let me. We don't need saving, Sarah insisted, though the tremor in her voice suggested otherwise. The bank manager snorted. Don't be stupid, Sarah. If this gentleman is offering— I'm offering a business proposition, James interrupted smoothly, rising to his feet. Not charity. Sarah's eyes narrowed suspiciously. What kind of proposition? An investment in you, in this place. James gestured around the diner. But first I'd like to hear your story and learn more about that locket. The deputy checked his watch impatiently. We don't have time for stories. Either he's paying the debt or we're proceeding with the seizure. James pulled out his phone. How about I wire the full amount to the bank now as a good faith deposit while I discuss terms with Ms. Miller? You can consider it a loan from me to her with paperwork to follow. The bank manager's expression shifted instantly from dismissive to obsequious. That would be acceptable, Mr. Carson, James Carson. Recognition dawned on the bank manager's face. Even in small-town Connecticut, James's name carried weight. As James made the transfer with a few taps on his phone, he watched Sarah's face cycle through confusion, suspicion, and cautious hope. What neither of them realized was that the silver locket around Sarah's neck was about to unearth secrets buried for decades, secrets that would change both their lives forever. Sarah watched in stunned disbelief as the bank manager and deputy practically tripped over themselves, leaving after James Carson's phone call. The name had meant nothing to her, but clearly the man sitting across from her wielded considerable influence. "Who exactly are you?" she asked bluntly, sliding into the booth opposite him. Lily had returned to her coloring, occasionally glancing curiously at their visitor. James smiled, and Sarah noted how it transformed his face from merely handsome to almost boyishly charming. "I told you, James Carson." "That doesn't explain why you just dropped nearly $200,000 to save a stranger's diner." "Let's just say I have a feeling about this place, and its owner." His eyes dropped to her locket again. "Would you mind if I looked at that?" Sarah's hand instinctively covered the precious keepsake. "Actually, I would. This is very personal to me." James nodded, respecting her boundaries. "Of course, I apologize. It's just— it looks remarkably similar to one I've seen before." "It's not particularly valuable," Sarah said defensively. "Just sentimental." "I understand completely." James glanced around the empty diner. "Would you tell me about this place? How long has it been in your family?" Sarah hesitated. She'd been raised not to trust windfalls or strangers bearing gifts, but something about James Carson's direct gaze made her want to talk. "My grandparents opened it in 1952. Miller's Diner has fed 3 generations of this town." Pride crept into her voice despite her wariness. "My grandfather believed good food brings people together. During the factory layoffs in the 80s, he let people eat on credit for months. And that tradition of generosity continued with you?" Sarah flushed. "We try, even when it's not the smartest business decision." "Sometimes the heart makes better choices than the balance sheet," James remarked. Sarah snorted. "Tell that to the bank." James laughed, a genuine warm sound. "Fair point." "Mommy makes the best apple pie in Connecticut," Lily piped up, abandoning her crayons to join the conversation. "Grandma taught her the secret ingredient." "Is that so?" James asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'll have to try it." "We don't have any maid," Sarah admitted. "Today wasn't exactly a normal business day." "Then perhaps tomorrow," James suggested. "I find myself suddenly interested in extending my stay in Millfield." Sarah studied him. Men like James Carson didn't just wander into towns like Millfield. "Why are you really here? Why help us?" "Would you believe a craving for excellent coffee and pie led me to the right place at the right time?" "No," Sarah said flatly. James's expression turned serious. The truth, then. I make my living recognizing untapped potential. This place has it. You have it. He leaned forward. I'm proposing a legitimate business partnership. I provide capital and business expertise. You provide the heart and soul of this place. Together, we revitalize Miller's Diner. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Sarah asked skeptically. A solid investment, I hope. Plus, there's something about that locket that I need to understand better. My locket again. Why are you so fixated on it? Before James could answer, Lily tugged at Sarah's sleeve. Can I show him my special box, Mummy? The one with Daddy's things. Sarah hesitated. Those mementos of Tom were their most precious possessions, yet something in James's expression, an earnestness beneath the polished exterior, made her nod. Okay, honey. Go get it. As Lily scampered upstairs to their apartment, Sarah turned back to James. Whatever you think you know about my necklace, it was my husband's last gift to me before he died of cancer 2 years ago. That's all. I'm very sorry for your loss, James said softly, and the genuine compassion in his voice caught Sarah off guard. Thank you, she replied, the familiar grief washing over her. Tom was everything to us. After he got sick, everything fell apart so quickly. The medical bills, then the pandemic. She trailed off, embarrassed by the sudden emotion. Life can change in an instant, James observed, sometimes for worse and sometimes for better, Lily announced, returning with a small wooden box clutched carefully in her hands. Daddy always said that. Sarah smiled sadly. He did, baby. Every day. Lily placed the box on the table and opened it reverently. Inside were Tom's wedding ring, his favorite baseball cap, a few photographs and some papers. See? This is my daddy, Lily said proudly, showing James a photo of Tom, tall, blonde, with the same serious eyes as his daughter. He's in heaven now, but Mummy says he watches over us. I'm sure he does, James replied gently. As Lily proudly displayed each treasure, Sarah noticed James's attention fix on something in the box. His expression shifted to one of intense concentration. May I? He asked, reaching toward a folded piece of paper. Sarah nodded, curious about his sudden interest. James carefully unfolded what appeared to be an old letter. His hands trembled slightly as he read it, color draining from his face. Where did Tom get this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It came with the locket, Sarah explained. He said an old friend gave it to him, to give to me. Why? What is it? James looked up, his eyes filled with an emotion Sarah couldn't quite name. Sarah, this letter was written by my mother 30 years ago. The diner fell silent, except for the rhythmic ticking of the old clock above the counter. That's impossible, Sarah finally said. The handwriting, the personal seal in the corner, I'd recognize them anywhere. James carefully refolded the letter. Sarah, I believe your husband knew my mother, and that connection might explain why I was drawn to stop at this particular diner today. As Sarah tried to process this revelation, the bell above the door jingled again. A tall woman in an expensive business suit entered, her eyes scanning the diner until they landed on James. There you are. I've been trying to reach you for hours, she exclaimed. The board meeting is in crisis mode, and you're having coffee in some roadside diner? James stood, his expression transforming to one of cool professionalism. Victoria, I didn't expect you to track me down. The woman, Victoria, fixed Sarah with a dismissive glance before turning back to James. Well, someone had to. You can't just disappear when the Thompson merger is imploding. She lowered her voice. James, there are hundreds of millions at stake. I'm handling an important personal matter, James replied firmly. Victoria laughed incredulously. More important than your company, than our future? The words hung in the air, their implication clear. Sarah felt suddenly intrusive in her own diner. I should give you privacy, she murmured, standing to leave. "No," James said quickly. "Please stay. Victoria and I will just be a moment." Nicky, as he guided his clearly annoyed companion to a far corner, Sarah stared at the letter James had been so affected by. What connection could possibly exist between her late husband Tom, a small-town mechanic, and the family of a man wealthy enough to casually write off $200,000? Lily leaned against her, whispering, "I think he's magic, Mommy." "He came just when we needed help." Sarah smoothed her daughter's hair, uncertain whether their mysterious benefactor was their salvation or the harbinger of complications she couldn't begin to imagine. Across the diner, the heated conversation between James and Victoria grew more intense. Sarah couldn't hear the words, but the body language told a clear story. Victoria was furious, James was unmoved. Finally, Victoria gathered her designer purse, shot Sarah another contemptuous look, and stormed out. James returned to the table, his expression apologetic. "Sorry about that interruption." "Girlfriend?" Sarah asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "Fiancé," James corrected, with a grimace that suggested the title wasn't entirely comfortable. "Though after today, who knows?" "I'm sorry if I've caused problems for you," Sarah said sincerely. James waved this away. "Victoria will survive the disappointment. Right now I'm more concerned with understanding how your husband came to possess a letter from my mother, and why she would have given him something so personal." Sarah's mind raced. Could it be a different Elizabeth Carson? It's not exactly an uncommon name. "The wax seal is our family crest," James said quietly. "And the references in the letter to the summer house in Maine, to my father's sailing accident, those are private family matters." A chill ran up Sarah's spine as pieces began shifting in her mind. "James, when exactly did your father have this sailing accident?" "July 1992, he replied. "Why?" Sarah reached into the box and pulled out another photograph. "Because my husband Tom was from coastal Maine. His parents died when he was young, but he was raised there by his grandmother until she passed away when he was 18. She handed James the photo. It showed a teenage Tom standing proudly beside an older woman in front of a modest fishing boat. James stared at the image, then slowly reached into his wallet and withdrew a small photograph of his own. It showed a large white sailboat with a family posing on the deck, a distinguished older man, an elegant blonde woman, and a young boy who was unmistakably James. "This was taken the day before my father's accident," James said quietly. "He took our yacht out in a storm. Against all advice, the boat capsized. He was the only one aboard." Sarah felt a strange sensation, as if the universe were rearranging itself around them. "Tom never talked much about his childhood," she said slowly. "He said it was too painful, but he insisted that Lily and I would always be safe because someone was watching over us." She touched her locket. "When he gave me this, he said it would always protect me in my darkest hour." James's eyes met hers. "I think Tom knew my mother much better than either of us realized, and I believe there's a reason I was meant to find you today." Udum, as the afternoon sunlight streamed through the diner windows, Sarah had the distinct feeling that her life's narrative had just taken a turn into uncharted territory, and the locket around her neck suddenly felt heavier with secrets yet to be revealed. Victoria's Lexus had barely disappeared down Main Street before James's phone erupted with calls. He silenced it with an apologetic glance toward Sarah. "Corporate crisis," he explained. "It'll wait." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Will it?" Sounded like hundreds of millions won't. "Some things are more important than money." James's gaze returned to Tom's belongings spread across the table, like answers. Sarah gathered Lily close. "Sweetie, why don't you go upstairs and feed Mr. Whiskers? He's probably hungry." Once Lily had bounded upstairs to tend to the family cat, Sarah leaned forward. "Let me be direct, Mr. Carson. James, please." "Fine, James." This is all very strange. You appear out of nowhere, pay off my debts, claim some mysterious connection between your mother and my late husband, and expect me to just accept it. For all I know, this could be some elaborate scam." James actually laughed. "A scam where I give you 170,000? That would be a first." "People with money do strange things for entertainment," Sarah replied, thinking of the reality shows Tom used to watch. "Fair point," James conceded, "but I assure you, my interest is genuine." He tapped the letter. "May I keep this overnight? I want to compare it to other letters from my mother." Sarah hesitated. "It's one of the few things I have from Tom's past." "I understand," James said, withdrawing his hand. "Then perhaps you'd consider coming to my hotel tomorrow. I have some family albums that might help us piece this together." Sarah studied him, this stranger who had inserted himself into her life so suddenly. Impeccably dressed in what she guessed was a suit that cost more than her annual income, he nevertheless had an earnestness that was difficult to dismiss. "Why does this matter so much to you?" she asked. James was quiet for a moment. "My mother died last year, cancer like your husband." His voice softened. "In her final months, she tried several times to tell me something important, but the medications made her confused. She kept mentioning a promise she had to keep, and a boy named Tommy." Sarah's heart skipped. Tom was called Tommy as a child. "My mother said she had a debt that could never be repaid," James continued. "I thought it was the morphine talking, but now—" The old diner clock chimed 5, startling them both. "I should get dinner started for Lily," Sarah said, suddenly aware of how long they'd been talking. James nodded. "Of course. I'm staying at the Millfield Inn. Perhaps you and Lily could join me for lunch tomorrow. We could talk more then." Sarah wavered. Part of her wanted to put as much distance as possible between her family and this wealthy stranger with his unsettling connections. But another part, the part that had lain awake countless nights, wondering how to save her daughter from homelessness, knew she couldn't afford to dismiss his help. 1 o'clock, she suggested. Perfect. James stood, his imposing height making the diner feel suddenly smaller. "And Sarah, I meant what I said about a business partnership. Regardless of whatever we discover about the past, I believe in this place." After he left, Sarah locked the door behind him and flipped the sign to closed, trying to process the afternoon's events. From the brink of eviction to a mysterious benefactor with ties to Tom, it was like something from one of Lily's storybooks, not real life in Millfield, Connecticut. Upstairs in their small apartment, Sarah found Lily chattering away to Mr. Whiskers, a ragged orange tabby who tolerated the attention with feline dignity. "Is the prince gone, Mummy?" "He's not a prince, honey, just a businessman who thinks our diner might be a good investment." "He liked Daddy's special box," Lily observed, stroking the cat, "and he looked at you like Daddy used to." "Lily Miller!" Sarah exclaimed, feeling her cheeks warm. "He did no such thing. Mr. Carson is engaged to that woman who came in." "She was scary," Lily declared, "like the evil queen from Snow White." Despite herself, Sarah laughed. "We shouldn't judge people by first impressions." "That's what you always say," Lily replied wisely, "but you also say trust your gut feelings. And my gut says she's mean and he's nice." Out of the mouths of babes, Sarah thought, turning to the refrigerator to assess their dinner options. Her gut had sent decidedly mixed signals about James Carson. He was undeniably attractive, unexpectedly kind, and completely out of her league, even if he hadn't been engaged to a woman who probably had her nails maintained by a personal manicurist. As she assembled a simple pasta dinner, Sarah's mind kept returning to the letter. What could it possibly contain that connected Tom to the Carsons? Tom had never mentioned knowing any wealthy families. After dinner and Lily's bedtime routine, Sarah found herself drawn to the wooden box again. She carefully removed the locket from around her neck and opened it. Tom's smiling face looked back at her from their wedding day. She'd looked at this tiny photo hundreds of times since his death, finding comfort in his frozen smile. But tonight, she studied it with new eyes. Who had Tom Miller really been before he walked into her life at a community college mixer 12 years ago? He'd always been vague about his childhood, saying only that he'd lost his parents young and been raised by his grandmother until her death when he was 18. After that, he'd worked his way through community college, becoming a mechanic with dreams of owning his own garage someday. Sarah had loved his work ethic, his kindness, his unwavering optimism, even as cancer ravaged his body. But had she ever truly known all of him? She carefully unfolded another item from the box, the deed to the diner, transferred to her name after her parents retired to Florida. The Miller family legacy, now miraculously saved from foreclosure by a stranger with questions about her husband. Nothing made sense. Why would the son of a wealthy family have any connection to Tom? And why would Tom have kept such a connection secret? Sarah was still pondering these questions when her phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. "I've confirmed the letter was written by my mother. Her diaries mention a Tommy several times between 1992 and 1995. We have much to discuss. James." Sarah stared at the message, a chill running through her. Whatever connection existed between the Carsons and Tom went deeper than a chance encounter. She texted back, "How did you get my number?" His reply came seconds later. "The bank manager. Hope you don't mind. Too forward." Despite herself, Sarah smiled at his self-awareness. Only slightly stalkerish. "See you tomorrow at 1. As she prepared for bed, Sarah had the unsettling feeling that she was standing on the edge of a revelation that might forever change how she viewed her life with Tom. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old diner sign that had hung for 3 generations. "Miller's," it proclaimed to the empty street, still standing against all odds, just like Sarah herself. But for how long, and at what cost to the memories she cherished? Tomorrow's lunch with James Carson might provide answers, but Sarah wasn't entirely certain she was ready for them. James Carson couldn't sleep. The Millfield Inn's presidential suite, which bore little resemblance to any presidential accommodation he'd ever experienced, felt claustrophobic despite being the hotel's largest room. His mother's letter lay on the bedside table, its contents now seared into his memory. "My dearest Tommy, by the time you read this, I will have returned to a life that feels increasingly hollow without your bright spirit in it. These summer months have been a gift I never expected and certainly don't deserve. You asked why I can't simply leave. If only life were so simple. The chains we forge through choices, especially the wrong ones, are not easily broken. Richard may be gone, but his legacy binds me still. Always remember that your goodness comes from within, not from circumstance. The money enclosed isn't charity, it's merely returning what should have been yours all along. Use it for your education. Become the man I know you can be. The locket contains my heart. One day, give it to someone worthy of your heart. And know that whatever happens, I am watching over you, even from afar. With eternal love, Elizabeth." James paced the worn carpet, pieces falling into place, yet still not forming a complete picture. His mother, Elizabeth Carson, had apparently formed a deep bond with a boy named Tommy, almost certainly Sarah's husband Tom, in the months after his father's death. But why? And why had his mother never mentioned this connection? The Carson family had owned a summer estate in coastal Maine for generations. After Richard Carson's sailing accident in July 1992, Elizabeth had taken 14-year-old James back to their Manhattan penthouse, then promptly sent him to Switzerland for boarding school. The following 3 summers, she'd claimed to be resting at the main property, while James remained in Europe with relatives or at academic camps. Had she actually been spending that time with Tom? But that made no sense. Why would his sophisticated, wealthy mother befriend a teenage boy from a fishing village? Unless... James froze mid-pace as a possibility surfaced that he'd never considered. His parents' marriage had been a battlefield of cold silences and heated arguments for as long as he could remember. His father, Richard, had been a ruthless businessman with a legendary temper. The official story was that Richard had taken the yacht out alone despite storm warnings, resulting in the tragic accident. But what if it hadn't been an accident at all? And what if Tom had been involved somehow? James shook his head, dismissing the thought. His imagination was running wild. More likely, his mother had simply befriended a local boy who reminded her of James during a difficult time. Yet the intensity of the letter suggested something deeper than casual friendship. His phone buzzed with Victoria's name for the 12th time that evening. James silenced it again, knowing the conversation would only devolve into ultimatums. The Thompson merger could wait. For the first time in years, something felt more important than business. Outside, the small town of Millfield had long since gone quiet, a stark contrast to the perpetual hum of Manhattan. In the distance, James could just make out the illuminated sign of Miller's Diner, a beacon in the darkness. Sarah Miller. James found his thoughts returning to her repeatedly. Beyond her obvious beauty, a natural, unaffected loveliness so different from the curated perfection of the women in his social circle, there was something compelling about her resilience. The way she'd stood her ground against the bank, against him, despite her desperate circumstances. And her daughter Lily, with those solemn eyes that seemed to see right through adult pretenses. They made a remarkable pair. James checked his watch. 3:17 a.m. In just under 10 hours, he'd see them again. The thought brought an unexpected warmth. Victoria would call this another of his rescue missions, his tendency to become involved in fixing others' problems, a habit she was determined to break. "You're not responsible for the whole world, James," she often said. "You have shareholders to answer to now." She wasn't wrong. Since taking over Carson Enterprises after his father's death, James had transformed the company from a traditional investment firm into a tech-forward powerhouse. The upcoming Thompson merger would be his crowning achievement, the largest acquisition in the company's history. Yet here he was, in a small Connecticut town, chasing ghosts and family secrets instead of finalizing the deal that would make headlines worldwide. His laptop chimed with an incoming email. It was from his mother's former personal assistant, Nancy, responding to his urgent inquiry. "James, I've searched the personal files as requested. Your mother kept a separate journal during the summers of 1992-1995. I've attached scanned copies of relevant pages. I must say the contents are rather surprising. Also found a photo you might find interesting, attached as well. Call if you need anything else. Nancy." James opened the attachments with trembling fingers. The journal entries confirmed his mother had indeed formed a bond with a local boy named Tommy during those summers in Maine. She described him as wise beyond his years and carrying burdens no child should bear. But it was the photo that stopped James's heart. It showed his mother sitting on the beach with a teenage boy. They were laughing, caught in a moment of genuine joy. The boy was undeniably a younger version of the man in Sarah's wedding photo. But what made James's breath catch was the striking resemblance between the boy and himself. At that age, they could have been brothers. The implication was staggering. James sat heavily on the edge of the bed, mind racing. Was it possible? Could Tom Miller have been his half-brother? Had his father known? Was that somehow connected to his death? He needed answers, and the only person who might have them was now permanently beyond reach. Unless... James grabbed his phone and did something he rarely did, acted on pure impulse. He texted Sarah. "Change of plans. Too important to wait." Can I come to the diner for breakfast? Need to show you something urgently. James. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness before her reply appeared. Diner opens at 7. Coffee will be waiting. James finally lay down, but sleep remained elusive. Tomorrow might reveal that his entire understanding of his family history was built on lies. Yet strangely, the prospect didn't disturb him as much as it should have. Perhaps because for the first time in years, he felt genuinely alive, awake to possibilities beyond spreadsheets and acquisitions. As dawn broke over Millfield, James showered and dressed with unusual care, choosing his least intimidating suit. The photograph of Tom and his mother was tucked safely in his jacket pocket. By 6:45 a.m., he was parked outside Miller's diner. Through the window he could see Sarah moving efficiently behind the counter, her hair pulled back, her expression focused as she prepared for the day. The sight filled him with an emotion he couldn't immediately identify. It took him a moment to recognize it as something he hadn't felt in a very long time: hope. Whatever revelations awaited inside those walls, James Carson had the strange certainty that his life was about to change in ways no business deal could ever match. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of his car and walked toward the diner door, where the closed sign had just been flipped to open. Sarah looked up as he entered, her smile cautious but genuine. "You're early." "Couldn't wait," James admitted. "I think I've found something that changes everything." As the first rays of sunlight streamed through the diner windows, illuminating Sarah's face, James pulled out the photograph that might forever alter both their lives. The bell above the door jingled, announcing the arrival of the diner's first regular customer of the day. Sarah's eyes met James's. "Give me an hour to handle the morning rush. Then we'll talk." James nodded, settling into a booth with a perfect view of Sarah as she greeted the elderly man who'd just entered. The easy warmth of her smile, the genuine interest as she asked about his grandchildren. These small moments of authentic connection were foreign to James's world of transactional relationships. Whatever happened next, James had the distinct feeling he'd found something in Millfield worth far more than all his business success. The question was, would Sarah Miller welcome the truth he was about to share, or would it destroy the memory of the man she had loved? James nursed his third cup of coffee, watching as Sarah deftly handled the morning crowd. By 8:30, the rush had subsided, and Sarah slid into the booth opposite him, looking tired but radiant. "Okay, Mr. Mystery Man, what couldn't wait until lunch?" James wordlessly placed the photograph on the table between them. Sarah picked it up, studied it for a long moment, then looked up sharply. "This is Tom as a teenager, with your mother." Her voice remained steady, but her fingers trembled. "Where did you get this?" "My mother's assistant found it in her files," James explained. "Sarah, have you noticed the resemblance between Tom and you?" She nodded slowly. "I see it now. I think Tom Miller might have been my half-brother." Sarah set the photo down carefully. "That's quite a leap, James." "Is it? Look at us at the same age. The timeline fits. My father died in a boating accident in 1992. That summer, my mother apparently formed a close bond with a local boy named Tommy. That doesn't mean they were related." "No," James conceded, "but it would explain why she kept in touch with him for years, why she gave him money for education, why she gave him a family heirloom to pass on." He gestured to her locket. Sarah's hand went protectively to her throat. "Tom never mentioned anything about this." "Maybe he didn't know himself," James suggested, "or maybe he was protecting someone." The bell jingled as a new customer entered, saving Sarah from responding immediately. She excused herself to take their order, giving James a moment to observe her. The graceful efficiency of her movements, the genuine smile that transformed her face when she spoke to her customers, she was nothing like the polished, calculated women of his social circle. When Sarah returned, her expression was composed, but her eyes troubled. Even if what you're suggesting is true, why does it matter now? Tom is gone. Your mother is gone. Because the truth always matters, James replied, and because it might explain why I was drawn to stop at this diner yesterday, out of all the places I could have been. Cosmic coincidence? Sarah's lips quirked in a skeptical half-smile. Next, you'll be talking about fate and destiny. Mock all you want, but how else do you explain my arrival precisely when you needed help most? Blind luck, Sarah countered. Or maybe you saw a foreclosure notice online and thought it was a good investment opportunity. James laughed. You have a suspicious mind, Sarah Miller. A single motherhood does that to you, she replied, but her expression had softened. So what now? You've shown me a photo that proves Tom knew your mother. That's all. I want to know more. About Tom, about their connection. If we were related, I'd like to know who my brother was. Sarah studied him, weighing something in her mind. Finally, she sighed. There might be someone who knows more. Tom's best friend, Mike. He's been in the Merchant Marines, but he still keeps a place here in town. He visits whenever he's stateside. Is he here now? As luck would have it, yes. He arrived last week for a month's leave. Sarah glanced at her watch. He usually stops by for lunch around noon. A new determination filled James. Then I'd like to stay and meet him, if you don't mind. On one condition, Sarah said firmly. We don't mention your theory to him until we have more proof. Mike was like a brother to Tom. This would hit him hard. Agreed. London, at precisely noon, the bell jingled as a burly man with a weathered face and sailor's stride entered the diner. Sarah! He boomed, arms wide for a hug. Mike! Sarah emerged from behind the counter, allowing herself to be enveloped in his bear hug. How was your morning run? 8 miles. Getting soft in my old age, Mike replied with a grin. He released Sarah and cast a curious glance toward James. Sarah led Mike to James's booth. Mike, this is James Carson. He's considering investing in the diner. Carson? Mike's brow furrowed briefly before his expression cleared. Good to meet you. Any friend of Sarah's is a friend of mine. As they shook hands, James studied Mike's face for any sign of recognition at his name. Had there been a flicker of something when Sarah introduced him? James is from New York, Sarah explained, pouring coffee for Mike. He just happened to stop in yesterday when things were at their worst with the bank. Lucky timing, Mike remarked, his eyes assessing James with new interest. Very, James agreed, wondering if the man across from him held keys to the mystery that had brought him to Millfield. So, Mr. New York, what brings you to our little corner of nowhere? Mike asked, attacking his club sandwich with gusto. Besides Sarah's coffee, which I admit is worth crossing state lines for. James measured his response carefully. Business trip gone sideways. Sometimes detours lead to unexpected opportunities. Mike nodded sagely. Life's funny that way. My buddy Tom, Sarah's husband, always said the best things happen when plans fall apart. You and Tom were close? James asked, trying to sound merely conversational. Like brothers, Mike confirmed, his expression softening. Met in community college. 2 broke kids with big dreams, you know. I joined the Marines. He became a mechanic, but we stayed tight. Sarah refilled their coffee cups, lingering at the table. Mike was our best man, and he's Lily's godfather. Honorary uncle, Mike corrected with a wink at Lily, who was coloring at the counter. Best job in the world. James felt an unexpected pang of envy for this easy camaraderie, the history they shared. His own friendships were largely transactional, business associates, fellow board members, the occasional golf partner. Nothing like this bone-deep loyalty. Tom sounds like he was quite a man, James remarked. The best, Mike agreed. Smartest guy I knew, though he never had the chances some folks get. But he made his own way, built something real here with Sarah. Did he ever talk about his childhood, before community college? Mike's expression shifted subtly. Not much. Tough times, mostly. Why? Just curious about the diner's history. James deflected smoothly. Sarah mentioned it's been in her family for generations. Wondering about Tom's side? Not much to tell there, Mike said, but something in his tone suggested otherwise. The conversation drifted to safer topics: Mike's travels, the diner's signature dishes, Lily's upcoming school play. Yet James couldn't shake the feeling that Mike was watching him with veiled calculation, as if weighing what James might already know. Finally, Mike checked his watch. Better hit the bank before it closes. Need anything while I'm there, Sarah? Actually, James interjected, would you mind if I tagged along? I need to make a deposit. It was a transparent excuse, but he needed to speak with Mike alone. Outside in the crisp autumn air, Mike lit a cigarette, offering one to James, who declined. Quit years ago, James explained. Smart man, Mike acknowledged, taking a deep drag. Now what's this really about? Because I know damn well you're not here about some small-town diner investment. James decided direct honesty was his only play. I think Tom Miller might have known my mother, Elizabeth Carson. Mike's face revealed nothing, but his knuckles whitened around his cigarette. What makes you say that? James produced the photograph. This was taken in Maine, summer of 1992. Mike studied the image, then handed it back without comment. Was Tom from Maine originally? James pressed. Look, Mr. Carson, Mike said finally, I don't know what game you're playing, but Tom was a private person. If he wanted you to know his business, he would have told you himself. Tom is gone, James said quietly, and I believe he may have been my half-brother. Mike's laugh held no humor. That's one hell of a leap. Is it so impossible? I didn't say that. Mike crushed his cigarette under his heel. But even if it were true, what's your angle here? The guy's been dead 2 years. You suddenly develop brotherly feelings and swoop in to save his widow's diner. It's not like that. No, because from where I'm standing it looks like a rich guy playing savior to ease his conscience. James felt his temper rise. You don't know me, Sullivan. And you didn't know Tom, Mike countered. So why don't we both back off before this gets ugly? They stood in tense silence, two men from different worlds, united only by their connection to a third who was no longer there to explain it. Finally, Mike sighed. Look, Tom was my best friend. If he kept secrets, he had reasons. Even from Sarah. Especially from Sarah. He wanted to protect her. From what? Mike stared at him for a long moment. Maybe from people like you. The words stung more than they should have. I have no intention of hurting Sarah or Lily. Intentions aren't guarantees, Mike said grimly. But for what it's worth, I believe you. He hesitated, then added, Tom left something with me before he died. Said if anything ever happened to Sarah or Lily, I should use it. James's pulse quickened. What was it? A letter, addressed to Elizabeth Carson. James's breath caught. Do you have it with you? Safety deposit box, Mike replied. Can't access it till tomorrow. I'd like to see it. That's not up to me. It belongs to Sarah now. James nodded, understanding the boundaries. Will you tell her about it? Tonight, Mike promised. But I need your word that whatever's in that letter, whatever happens next, you won't hurt those two. They've been through enough. You have my word, James said, meaning it more sincerely than any business deal he'd ever sealed. The next morning they gathered at the diner before opening hours. Sarah had arranged for Lily to stay with a neighbor, understanding that adult conversations needed to happen. I got the letter, Mike said, placing an envelope on the table. Before we open this, I need your word that whatever we find won't change things for Sarah and Lily. The diner stays Sarah's no matter what. Actually, James said, sliding a folder across the table, I've already taken care of that. These papers transfer full ownership back to you, Sarah. No loans, no partnerships, no strings. Sarah stared at the folder. Why would you do that? Because it's the right thing, James said simply. Mike nodded approval, then carefully opened the envelope and unfolded a letter. It's from Tom, he confirmed, and began reading aloud. Dear Elizabeth, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and Sarah and Lily need help. I've never asked you for anything before, but I'm asking now. Please watch over them. You once told me that the debts between us were paid. You were wrong. Some debts can never be settled, only passed forward. The truth is, I could have saved him that day. I chose not to. For years, I've lived with that choice. But meeting Sarah, having Lily, they healed something in me I thought would always be broken. They deserve better than the shadow of my past mistakes. You kept your promise all these years, never telling James about me, about that day. Perhaps now it's time he knew, or perhaps some secrets are better left buried. I leave that decision to you. The locket you gave me, I passed it to Sarah. She doesn't know its history or value, but she knows it's precious, as she is precious to me. Tell James I'm sorry for everything. Tommy. Silence fell over the booth. Sarah's face had drained of color. Mike looked grim, and James felt the ground beneath him shifting. I don't understand, Sarah whispered. What did he mean I could have saved him? Saved who? My father, James said quietly. The boating accident. Tom was there? Sarah's voice rose in disbelief. It explains everything, James said. Why my mother maintained contact with him, why she supported his education, why she gave him a family heirloom. What are you suggesting? Sarah demanded, protective anger flaring. That Tom let your father die? Tom would never... We don't know what happened, Mike interjected, and we can't ask either of the people who were there. James struggled to process the implications. Had Tom Miller been present when Richard Carson drowned? Had he chosen not to save him? And if so, why? The locket, he said suddenly. May I see it? After a moment's hesitation, Sarah unclasped it and handed it to him. James examined it carefully, finding a hidden catch his mother had shown him long ago. The locket opened not just to the photo compartment, but to a second chamber. Inside was a tiny folded note and a key. There's something else, James said, carefully extracting them. The handwriting was his mother's. The truth lies in Box 1342, First Maritime Bank, Portland. The choice to open it is yours alone. Whatever you decide, remember that not all debts can be paid in full, but all can be forgiven. E. James looked up. It's a key to a safety deposit box in Maine. Portland is about 4 hours from here, Mike observed. What's in the box? Sarah asked, her voice tight. I don't know, James admitted. But I think it might hold the answer to what happened the day my father died, and why our families are connected. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. When she opened them, determination had replaced confusion. Then we need to go to Portland. The bank manager in Portland personally escorted them to the vault. Box 1342 hasn't been accessed in over 20 years, he informed them, as they removed a metal box containing an envelope, journal, and cassette tape. In a private room, James opened the envelope first, finding a statement in his mother's handwriting, dated July 17, 1992, the day of his father's drowning. What happened today was an accident. Richard had been drinking. He became violent, as he often did. Thomas Milner, aged 16, who works at the marina, attempted to stop Richard from taking out the yacht during the storm. Richard struck the boy and proceeded anyway. Thomas, concerned for Richard's safety, followed in a smaller boat. When Richard's yacht capsized, Thomas attempted rescue but couldn't reach him in time. Thomas Milner, James repeated. Not Miller. He changed his name after his grandmother died, Mike explained. Wanted a fresh start. The leather-bound journal revealed more. Richard Carson had been abusive for years. The night he died, he'd hit Elizabeth badly. Tom found her bleeding on the beach, helped her, and promised to stop Richard from going out in the storm. Your mother's statement was meant to protect Tom, Sarah realized, in case anyone questioned your father's death. But Tom blamed himself anyway, James said. That's what he meant, that he could have saved my father, but chose not to. He was 16, Mike said forcefully. Trying to rescue a grown man in a storm? He probably nearly drowned himself. James nodded, reading further. The diary mentions he suffered hypothermia, was hospitalized. My mother visited him every day, then arranged funds for his grandmother's care. But the true revelation came next. The accident wasn't their first meeting. Tom had been working at the marina all summer. James paused, struggling. She writes that he reminded her of the son she had to give up. What? Sarah whispered. My mother had a child before me, James said. She was 19, unmarried. Her parents forced her to give the baby up. And Tom was that baby? Sarah asked. No, but she says Tom was the spitting image of Michael, her first love, the man who fathered her first child. James looked up. Tom wasn't my half-brother. He was the son of my mother's first child, my nephew. The cassette tape suddenly seemed significant. James played it, and his mother's voice filled the room. James, if you're listening to this, you found Tom Miller through the locket. Before I met your father, I loved a fisherman named Michael Milner. I became pregnant, and my parents sent me away. The boy was adopted by a local family. Years later, I married Richard Carson. We had you, my precious James. In 1992, I discovered my first son had returned to his birth father's village, married, and had a son, Thomas Milner. The resemblance was unmistakable. He had Michael's eyes, his jawline. Your jawline, James. Our blood runs in his veins. I couldn't claim him without revealing truths that would destroy too many lives. Instead, I watched over him from afar. He grew into a fine man who never knew I was his grandmother. Family is not always defined by documents, but by love and duty that transcend generations. My deepest wish is for healing, for all of you. As the tape ended, 3 stunned faces stared at each other. Tom was your nephew, Sarah whispered. He never knew. And I never knew I had an older brother, James said, or that I was an uncle. Which makes you Lily's great-uncle, Mike added. James thought of Lily's eyes that, now that he knew to look, carried the unmistakable Carson shape. Family, his family, in a diner in Millfield. Tom wanted to protect you from all this, Mike said to Sarah, but he made provisions. The letter to Elizabeth, the locket with the key. He knew someday the truth might be needed. 1 month later, the newly renovated Miller's Diner celebrated its grand reopening. The vintage charm remained, but with modern updates and an expanded dining area. A wall of family photos now included several of Tom in Maine, alongside a portrait of Tom and Sarah's wedding day with Lily and Mike. James had made Millfield his second home, establishing a trust for Lily's education and creating an office above the diner for his increasingly frequent visits. His engagement to Victoria had ended, but he found he didn't miss the cutthroat corporate world as much as expected. As Sarah leaned against his shoulder during the celebration, James felt the weight of the Carson legacy lifting. The corporate empire his father had built no longer defined him. Instead, he found his identity in this unlikely circle. In Sarah's quiet courage, Lily's trusting eyes, and Mike's steadfast friendship. The silver locket that had started their journey now rested in a display case, its mission complete. In its place, Sarah wore a simple heart pendant, James's gift, inscribed with words that had become their shared philosophy. Love endures. Truth heals. Outside, snow fell on the small Connecticut town, covering old scars and creating a clean slate. And inside Miller's Diner, a family gathered. not defined by blood alone, but by the stronger bonds of choice, forgiveness, and love that transcended generations. Some debts Elizabeth had written can never be paid in full, but all can be forgiven. As James looked around at his newfound family, he understood at last what she had meant. The ledger was closed, the accounts settled, and in their place remained only the most valuable inheritance of all, the knowledge that they belonged to each other, now and always.